How's it going, everybody? This is International Master Daniel Wrench. This is Chess.com, and today we bring you the second video in our mating nets portion of the Patterns Everyone Must Know video series. You guys know exactly why we're here. No speech needed for the beginning of this video. Remind you, we covered all the mating nets that I deemed directly associated with the pony in the first video. Generally or specifically how the knight operates with the queen, the Batman and Robin duo, and how the knight operates with the rook and the other straight line pieces. And one person, or let's say one piece, they're not real people, Danny. Let's say one person, just one piece that was also involved in a lot of those mating nets, and the piece that somebody guessed would be next because we covered the knight. Here we're going to start with mating nets that specifically have to deal with the bishop, the diagonal operator. I would say that the bishop is best used in many ways for the destruction of your opponent's castle position, and so you're going to notice that a lot of these patterns, the double bishop sacrifice, the missing F and H pawn ones we're going to look at, the Greek gift, and some of the others, Boden's mate, the Crisscross Mate. A lot of these bishop mates have to do with the destruction of someone's castle position. You'll notice that the bishops tend to do well being the first, let's say the leader of the attack, the first piece to crash through the door when it comes to a mating net against a king's castle position. Of course, there are mating nets that have nothing to do with the bishop sacrificing itself and all that stuff, but without further ado, let's jump right in and see all the mating nets that I classified directly associated with the bishop, just like we did the pony in the first video, and let's move on to position number one. Okay, our first little mini-series involving the bishop is something that I classified as the missing F pawn. You can also classify it as the missing H pawn. Tend to be a lot of mating nets around a castled position for the king when one of these pawns, whether it's the F pawn or the H pawn, has been extended or goes missing. And we saw that also with the knight. So in this case, the bishop on c4 is already opened up along this diagonal, creating tactical and mating net tension. And remind you, I'm not going to remind you that you need to pause the video every time we set up a new position and try to solve it yourself. If you want the best application of these concepts that you're learning, apply yourself, right? Deliberate practice. And otherwise, don't complain when you see a bunch of positions and it doesn't really improve your thought process. So apply yourself, and then if you get it right or wrong, then see the answer. So the winning move here for white is, of course, knight takes h7, immediately applying a fork to the queen and rook. And of course, if the king moved or the queen moved, I guess specifically to h4 would stop the mating threat that's coming. But obviously, black would be losing a very large amount of material, and the game would quickly follow. So for our purposes today, we're going to look at king takes h7 and queen h5 mate. Very common checkmate pattern when the F pawn has gone missing. Let's look at the second position. In our second position here, you see we've already flipped the board one time. We're now looking at it from black's perspective. Assuming you pause the clock and attempted to solve it yourself, black's idea is pretty obvious, especially when we consider that we just saw this pattern a move previous. Here, rather than a sacrifice for a mate in 2, I guess technically this position is a mate in 3 if he wants to sack there, or king to g3 is met by queen h4 checkmate. So we see again the missing F pawn and the bishop guarding that diagonal opens up the possibility for mating nets. In this case, it's not a pawn that goes missing on the h file, but rather a bishop, or even any piece would be fine. But the point is, again, the first few positions we're seeing different patterns that occur with the missing F or H pawn, and I directly associate these with diagonal control, which is why we're classifying this as the bishop mates, the beginning of the bishop mates video. Let's look at the next position. Okay, and back to white's perspective. If you haven't paused your videos, you know what that is, right? We've said it before. That's a you problem, not a me problem. I'm moving ahead. Queen takes h7, exclamavianch. Obviously, black's choices are pretty limited at this point. And after king takes h7, rook to h5 check. The king must enter to g6, as we see the bishop has already been controlling this critical diagonal, and the winning move is, ding, 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 bishop f7 checkmate. So we see a mating pattern with a forced mate in 3. Again, this particular one I like showing because it's really not a very common position. I can't even tell you if I've ever checkmated an opponent of mine in this fashion, with a rook guarding the bishop and the bishop guarding the rook and everybody kind of coming together to join in this party to checkmate the black king. But the theme, of course, of the missing f-pawn and recognizing that when you see patterns in chess, that's the whole point of this, you guys, is that not all of these positions will occur in your games. You may never get any of these exact positions, but patterns repeat, right? So the missing f-pawn, we see the climax there, that there were all kinds of ways we saw for the person developing a mating attack to try to blow open the king. And it's like, remember I told you the whole point of getting all these patterns really familiar in your head is so that you can't allow yourself in every position to consider crazy sacrifices in chess. Chess is much more of a science than it is an art. I hate to bust your bubble. You're not going to be sacrificing for checkmate all the time. You got to be technical and you got to be concrete. But the point is, when you familiarize yourself with patterns, it's kind of like a get out of jail free card to allow yourself to consider more creative moves. It doesn't mean they're always going to work, but when you start to see, hey, that f-pawn's gone, or hey, this piece is here, and I remember this knight and rook work well together in this kind of mating net, etc., you start to give yourself more of a get out of jail free card to be like, all right, well, I'm going to take a few minutes to see if there isn't an aggressive possibility here against the enemy king. And again, here we see a queen sacrifice, which is really kind of pretty, lead to a forced mate. We love it. And the point is, this mate may never occur in your own games, but it's a very familiar pattern when we've seen that f-pawn go missing. So let's move on to the next position. Here we are switching themes a little bit. As I said in the brief introduction, we would start with one type of theme. I told you it was the missing f-pawn, missing h-pawns, you want to call it, how the bishops control diagonals. This is one of my favorite ways to use a bishop, and one that I particularly highlighted in the intro, that the bishop tends to be such a good piece to be the first one to break through. The bishop tends to be such a good piece to be the first one to lead the attack and sacrifice against an enemy king's castled position. So obviously I've already given you clues, and you've probably already paused your clock and tried to attempt to solve it. And the move here is the first example of our Greek gift, known as the Trojan Horse. You give up this piece, and we all know the history of the Trojan Horse. If it's taken, likely black will not live to see the light of day at the end of accepting this bold sacrifice. So after bishop takes h7, what exactly is black going to do? A typical thing with a Greek gift, bishop sacrifice here is, well, first thing, let's point out the positional factor, which is that these sacrifices work when you have a pawn on e5. By definition, a pawn on e5 means no knight on f6. By definition, no knight on f6 means no protection of h7. And if your opponent doesn't recognize that potential in this structure, then you should always be aware of this type of sacrifice. So just take that note. That's the first reason why this mating net happens. And after bishop takes h7, there are always possibilities to deny the bishop, but it wouldn't really help black survive the position anyway. We'll look at it. And after king takes h7, white always follows up with the move knight to g5 check. Of course, giving up the queen at this point should actually probably be considered, just because black is on the verge of getting mated. Black will not get enough in this type of position, even with moves like captures, something as simple as check, and maybe even coming back to break the pin or castling short. White will have a winning mating attack, and the material is not going to make up for the queen, just to point that out. Not really the point of our video here, but I always like to cover all the bases in every position we do so no one feels like the position was flawed, just to get a point across. But the mating net here, the most common way the pieces develop the mating attack needs to be seen real quick after king g8, because it's one of the things that really highlights why the Greek gift is so dangerous. Again, we've already highlighted the positional principles. So it's so dangerous because pretty much after you take the piece, it is never an option to return home when this is coming. The mate on h7 is unstoppable, besides by moving the rook away, and doing so frees up the king square. But after, we always take this pawn first, and then repeat, just like shampoo. We rinse and repeat, and eventually end with mate. See that again, just so you really get the whole power of the Greek gift mating net in your head. This position is just about always a forced win. Again, sacking the queen for the knight here, may actually be the only recourse left. But the mating net that everyone needs to know is that you always capture f7 first, which clears the 7th rank and allows white to go to work and take care of business there. So in this particular position, after takes here, moving to h8 obviously will allow queen h5 and queen h7 mate. H6 would allow an immediate discovered check and winning the queen. So G6 after the bishop is sacrificed is very commonly the only way for your opponent to basically have a fighting chance. And I've had people make this sort of sacrifice against me and run out into the center and actually survived. And we'll maybe hopefully talk about positions on occasion where someone may get a little excited about this Greek gift sacrifice and maybe it's not justified. But generally, it's extremely dangerous and a very practical thing to do for the attacker, even if it doesn't work. So it's a very hard position to defend. There are a number of moves here for white. Even queen to d3 check. F5 is forced if the king moves. We're mating him on the H file, and something like queen to g3 is good enough for a win. A discovered check is going to be coming against the king here pretty shortly. The queen guards any counterplay, and the king really has no way out of it. Moving again off to the H file somewhere would either allow a discovered check immediately with the bishop on c1, or even just check and check Alina Lashlamba on h7. So that's one way to do it. Queen g4 also works, but one very common move that I think people underestimate, especially when the king is not castled yet, that you have at your disposal in the Greek gift once the king comes up, is to immediately play a move like h4, which protects the knight, so has its advantages there, but also just basically threatens h5 check. And either the king is going to be mated or discovered check winning the queen, or he'll come up this way and get mated another way. Who knows, maybe something really fun like check, and after he goes here, castles, looks to be pretty close to checkmate. If I didn't know any better. So, h4 is the winning move here for white. The only other idea here might be to try to move the queen where it's not going to get discovered, but again, after queen d3, f5, and now you can take f6. After king takes, castles long with check. Looks pretty darn good as well, right? And taking it forward checkmate. So looks like it's going to be nothing but a ton of fun here for white, and to spend a little more time in this position than I wanted to, but really want to establish in your subconscious that this sacrifice is a real danger. It's one of the most common ways that white will lead with a bishop to get a mating net, and the Greek gift mating net itself is just so common. And especially when you've established this structure with the pawn on e5. And so seeing the mating net that occurs after knight g5 and then the queen coming up is the most important thing, because that's the thing that really reminds you why it's so dangerous. And you should know that even if you don't see a totally concrete mating net after king g6, the position is almost always winning. And we saw that this position is of course no exception. White is completely winning after a number of moves here, h4 likely being the strongest. So let's take a look at another one of these Trojan Horse Greek gift sacrifices. This one here I really want to show, mainly because there's another little maneuver, little net idea that you should be aware of when you're the attacker, the one making the Greek gift sacrifice. Bishop takes h7. One that I think is a really subtle and an awesome maneuver. I love every time I have the opportunity to play it. Not in real games that much anymore for me, but blitz games still on occasion. And after bishop takes h7, which you guys already know is coming, and knight g5, we're not going to look at king to g6, which is probably black's best chance, but again, I can promise you it is losing once again after ideas like h4 and coming up just as we've already discussed. But the point is that here after king g8, queen h5, rook e8, we do the same mating net, but in this scenario, you'll notice that after we give check and king f8, checking on h8 is not mate, and the knight actually has the ability to block. So is this enough for your opponent to defend? If you give this check, he'll go to f7, and you've got nothing but repetition, right? But there is a move here that is very commonly used as like the climax after the knight blocks, which, by the way, is maybe the most common setup. Why? Because this structure occurs from what opening? Ding, ding, ding. I know we haven't covered this one that deeply in my Pawn Structure 101 series, but International Master David Proust, my partner, covered a couple of videos in that series in the structure, and this is a French opening. Even if it didn't come from a French directly, it's the structure, and the knight goes to e7 almost always there because the pawn is established on e5 so early that this knight never really can develop there. Why is that important? Because this knight on e7 always has the ability to block on g8. So knowing that this type of maneuver, this climax I'm about to show you is so important, it just is really good to just take note of that. So again, we're not going to look at king g6, but as I said, there is an ending sequence, an ending maneuver to this little Greek gift mating net, and it goes a little something like this. Right at the end, you play queen to h5, which threatens queen f7 mate. The idea is that after queen or rook blocks on e7, he's taking away the piece is taking away the square from the leader and allowing the move knight h7 checkmate as the climax. Very important that you see that this worked, because we took f7, then we came back, went back to h7, forced the knight to come to g8, and then backed up with the threat of knight to h7 checkmate. Again, neither piece blocking on the 7th rank is gonna help, because in both cases knight h7 is mate. The only other move that black has to try to hold on is the move knight h6, but the position is still easily winning for white. After the move knight h7 check, king moves over. Obviously, king e7 is gonna run into a bit of an issue, and after king to g8, knight f6 check, exclamaviach. Taking loses immediately after we check. No matter where the king goes, we pick up the knight with check. He goes back, and we can take f6, threatening mate on g7, and black must start giving away incredibly large amounts of material. And playing back to f8, bishop takes h6 is coming. At this point, I'm actually not even down a single material. In fact, I'm actually up material, and the position is completely over. Black is likely mated very quickly as well. I'm not even going to continue. So just to see it again, in the climax of this mating net, after we give check on h8, the backup to h5 in the end, and that this e7 square is so desperately wanting to be used to guard f7, only takes away the running room for the king. And in this case, the move knight h6 doesn't work at all. Most of the time it doesn't, because of this exact type of idea. Check and takes here. Likely bishop takes here is also completely winning, as taking the knight would allow a discovered check, winning the queen, and anything else probably I would just back up and maintain my material, if not have something better. So position is completely winning. Take a good look at this type of position, this type of structure. This is like something that belongs in the Pawn Structure 101 Series 2 as far as the chains, and understanding that this is a very common tactical motif that occurs in chain structures. So with that said, we're going to move on to our next theme. Well, I guess I lied in the sense that we're moving on directly to the next theme. Rather, I want to show you one more final, as I said after the first position, Greek gift sacrifice when it doesn't work. Here we're looking at the position from black's perspective, obviously, and with a lot of similar features, right? We have this pawn established on e4, which guards f3. That by itself suggests that the white knight is not in the best optimal defensive position. And of course, we have to look at this sacrifice. But there are some other factors here that suggest that black should be a little bit careful. First of all, he's already castled, which is going to take down or take away a lot of the power of ever running the h-pawn if that ends up being needed, like in the other example we saw, the first one. Also, the fact that he's a little underdeveloped means that if white has an opportunity to maybe give back a little bit of material, which is very common when your opponent sacrificed a piece, you're willing to give something back, to survive the game. Black may not have enough firepower to end the game, and that's exactly the case here. Black made a Greek gift sacrifice, but after king takes h2 and knight g4 check, obviously this move would probably need to be followed with resignation immediately. So that's not the idea. And as I said, usually the best way to approach it is to be aggressive with the king, even though if the sacrifice is done right, this shouldn't be enough to save white, and usually black does have enough. But this is an example, because of the things I highlighted, black's lack of development and not really having the threat of running the h-pawn. Just the fact that this bishop is closed, even if it's temporary, makes a huge difference. What exactly can black do here? I'm threatening to win this pawn on e4, and the fact that your f-pawn is pinned, you see you can't play that because I got the bishop on the king, makes a big difference. So you want to keep the attack going. Maybe you consider queen g5, but I'll go ahead and capture on e4, gaining a tempo on your queen so there's no discovered check, and I'll go ahead and run my king away. If you end up having to settle on winning this, best case scenario for you, you've given up two pieces for a rook, and I would definitely prefer white here despite the king in the center with my active pieces, and maybe I'll use the h-file to get an attack on you. So certainly unclear at best for black. And the other way to play something like moving this knight to defend the pawn, and open the bishop also fails to a move like this. I'm going to trade here, and I don't think you have enough to keep me stranded. So the best thing for you to consider is a move like queen to d6 check, which, again, now if I take, you're going to go ahead and open up a discovered check can of worms on me, and I'm gonna be mated here pretty soon. I guess this is one way for black to make that happen. But I'm not going to take the knight, and rather I'm going to play f4. And so again, now when you en passant me with check, I'll take. You'll give check, and I'll run. and you don't have enough because of your lack of development, lack of firepower to finish off your Greek gift sacrifice. So best case scenario, once again, you're in a position where you have a rook for 2 pieces, my king's in the center, but I would say it's probably unclear. Maybe white even has the better chances dynamically if he can activate his pieces and maybe use open files and diagonals against black's king. But best case scenario, it's unclear. So what were some of the factors that, again, suggested that the Greek gift mating net might not work? The lack of development, the fact that you were already castled, so you didn't have as much power running the H-pawn, and I would say most importantly, the fact that this pawn was weak. If we had this exact same scenario, but you establish a black pawn on d5, the position would be completely winning for black, of course. Obviously, not just from taking a bishop, but let's imagine that bishop's gone. But you see if the chain is being solid, then this sacrifice is going to be so strong because white doesn't have enough counterplay to open the center, and the king is just going to be under too much firepower. In this kind of situation, again, I'm highlighting that this pawn is weak on e4. Black has to be very careful because if he doesn't get enough forcing moves in, he's not going to succeed in the mating net here, and I'm going to eliminate e4 and probably get away with my king. So that's going to kind of climax or summarize our coverage of the Greek gift mating net, and now for realsies this time, we're going to move on to the next theme. You all know this position, of course, very, very famous, double bishop sacrifice coming here. I think it was also known as Lasker's sacrifice. Yes, indeed it was, just because he was famous for using this idea more than once, and the fact that his opponents allowed that is kind of astonishing. But, you don't always have a choice. Against a good positional player, they develop their pieces in such a way that create these opportunities. Here, of course, white starts with the sacrifice on h7, and the rest of this theme is pretty much history. A little Chekaruski. We take here. Threatening checkmate, and just to show you exactly the best way that it happens after king takes, there's a couple different ways. I think even rook f3 right away is winning, but usually the most accurate is giving this check. This move doesn't work because of checkmate on g5, and only then complete the rook lift, because in this case, the queen is actually guarding the g-file and is going to deliver the most powerful form of checkmate. That check on c5 doesn't make a difference, and black is busted. So once again, we see 2 bishops lined up. It's a very common mating net, a way to blow open your opponent's castle position, and after the double bishops are sacked, the game is over, red rover. Next position. The second example of this mating net, we'll take it from black's perspective just because we always want to be fair and look at it from both sides. And same idea occurs, nothing super special. If king takes, again, both rook lift right away as well as check and rook over, I believe, is sufficient. Here we're going to see white's, the other attempt that someone might try to escape this is recognize that the only other move here to stop the h1 mate other than taking the bishop is to try to free an escape line. But doing so, pushing the pawn either 1 or 2 squares, allows the move queen to g3. We're threatening a very common mating net where we discover the bishop and unleash the queen. So after a move like rook f2, we give this check. The king has to give up the rook. When we consider rook f6 is coming, as well as just the immediate threat of queen to g2 mate, the game is completely lost for white. The next one I wanted to include is one that I really wasn't even sure I wanted to put in the mating nets portion of these series, but I realized there was enough examples of this idea occurring in games, even in my own games, and being aware that it is a pretty common motif, and it's not a tactical motif, kind of, I guess, but it's definitely enough something that occurs enough around the king to consider it a mating net on its own. So here it's white to play, and if you haven't taken the time to solve it, again, remember whose fault that is. We give a little Chekaruski, and we play bishop to g8. The idea here, in the name we're giving it, is the Crafty Bishop, the bishop that enters in along the diagonal in front of the queen. Obviously, we know if those roles were reversed, it would be checkmate and 1, because the queen leading the way is more powerful. But we don't always have that battery. We don't always have a battery set up. I don't even know if I'm going to cover a battery in this series in that such straightforward manner, because it's pretty obvious tactical motif and not something I consider a mating net pattern in that way. Just a good direction and coordination of the pieces. But in this case, this check and then sacrifice of the piece on g8, sort of a desperado. I guess not really a desperado if there's multiple pieces hanging only for white. Is it a clearance sacrifice? I don't know as far as what it was classified in the tactical realm, but it's the Crafty Bishop, we're calling it. We remove and give up the bishop along the diagonal. Here's the key to this. They can't take the knight that was on pre because the bishop is going to remain guarding it. And they can't take the bishop that's on pre because the knight remains guarding the mate. So exactly what black can do to deal with the mate is simple. The only option is to block the diagonal of the queen, since taking either one of these pieces fails, right? But the other thing the bishop threatened there, and this doesn't really fall into a mating net pattern, which is why I was struggling to decide if I was going to show it, but it is a pattern, and he has to block the diagonal, whether it's with the f-pawn or the g-pawn. And either one is completely losing to either bishop takes f7 or even knight takes f7 right away. Both are winning a large amount of material and still leaving the black king under a lot of fire. Moving the f-pawn might lose even more if we can take e6, attacking the queen and decide how many pieces we want to munch on next. So interesting little theme to be aware of. We lead with the bishop and sacrifice it along the diagonal with the threat of checkmate with two anchors, right? There's two anchors, which is what makes the Crafty Bishop, we're calling it, work. Both the bishop is an anchor for the queen as well as the knight, and that's what makes this pattern work. Let's see another example of this. Again, of course, we take black's perspective. See it one more time, very similar, not totally exactly the same, but we give a little check and enter with the bishop. And again, can't take both pieces at once. He must guard the diagonal, and in both cases, this pawn is going to fall, and with it, a large amount of material. And one more, slightly different for good measure, because I want to show that the Crafty Bishop, whatever you want to call it, sacrifice, clearance sacrifice, can occur not only for the queen along the diagonal, which we've already seen, the queen along the diagonal where the bishop sacrifices itself and both the knight and bishop guard this key square, right? Helping white win the game, as we've seen from the last two examples. In this case, it's sort of similar, but the queen is along a file. So the Crafty Bishop is a mating net idea that can work, even if the queen is along a file and not just on the queen and bishop battery. The move, of course, is bishop to g8. What should be noted real quick is the bishop takes g6 doesn't work, not because I'll take it. That would still allow mate, either way. But the move rook h8 gains a tempo on the queen, and now I would consider taking the bishop. Of course, you could block it, but the position is really maybe totally unclear because I was at the exchange to start the position, if I'm talking about black's perspective. So the move is bishop to g8. Causing this interference and preventing the rooks from grabbing the H file is the key part of the bishop, the Crafty Bishop working here, opening up the square for the queen. Of course, if king takes, we have Chekaruski, and if rook takes, we have Chekaruski followed by Chekalina Lashlamba. So pretty good stuff, and hopefully you're seeing that this Crafty Bishop idea is a pattern that works. Let's move on to our final theme for this video here. And that is, of course, the one mating net that could never be go uncovered if you're talking about bishop ideas, right? Boden's Mate, the Crisscross Bishop Mate. Maybe a lot of you didn't even know it was called Boden's Mate, but white to play and win if you haven't paused your clocks. In fact, if you haven't even solved this problem, you really need to take a good long look in the mirror. Just kidding. It's okay if you don't get the right answer to some questions. Anyway, that's checkmate. Take a good look at that. This is a mating net that everybody should be aware of this, right? Everybody and their cousin that doesn't play chess should be aware of this mating idea. Bishop a6 checkmate, the Crisscross Mate. Let's see another example. Here we go with one that's the same pattern but more advanced, and one of my favorite because I've used this idea in a position before. Not as forcing as the first one where we were just basically sacrificing for mate and two, but the world is not always that easy and laid out for us. Here the move is queen to a6, I would say double exclam. And the reason it's a double exclam is because here I'm sort of sacrificing the queen straight up for a pawn without even a check, without any of the forcing moves. But it's pretty simple. I'm threatening to play queen takes a7. And that's a pretty darn good threat, because if I do so, I'm going to be checkmating you on the dark squares and developing an awesome attack against your king. And the point again, if you take it, here we see Boden's Mate once again, the Crisscross Mate. So notice the first one we saw this forcing sacrifice to the queen that was check and an obvious mate in two. Here the position is not mate in two, and black has a number of moves that he could technically play here to try to prolong the game. But white is totally winning because of the threat of queen takes a7. Noted should be that the only really aggressive idea that black might try here, let's say a passive move like this to guard the threat, like I was pointing out, just allows queen takes a7. But the only other aggressive thing black could do would be to try to attack this bishop with a move like knight h5 or g5. In both cases, if I took a7, you would take my lonely bishop, and that wouldn't be so bueno for me. But the thing is that moving the queen here also threatens something else. The original bad boy, the forcing way to deliver this mate. So notice how awesome this tactical pattern is, the Boden's mate, Crisscross Mate. We're threatening queen takes c6 and queen takes a7, and this is not fun for black. Finally, the more advanced version of the same idea, once again, is a small little tactic showing you, as I said, not all the examples we'll give throughout this series will be exactly forced mates. The idea is to show the mating net patterns so you can be familiar with them, and also show you real-life situations where, okay, maybe you don't get the mating net pattern, but you recognize the idea, and so it led to something else, the win of material or something like that. So in this position, black plays the move, d5, brilliant move, exclam. If either piece takes on d5, you should know what's coming next. The business, right? And if the bishop moves anywhere, we also know what's coming next. I guess the only place it could go to that doesn't allow that would be a move like this, but that's the loss of a whole piece. And otherwise, he could also move the knight or something to avoid the immediate sacrifice of mate. But again, we're losing the piece. So we see that the idea of the Boden's mate led black to the win of a piece with this brilliant move, d5, threatening the crisscross sacrifice as well as a piece, and the game was over. Okay, and that's going to pretty much wrap it up here for the second video in the mating nets pattern theme part of this entire video series. Hope you guys are having tons of fun, and hope that you guys enjoyed this awesome example of really about 20 positions. And I hope you did. Hope you scored well. Hope you really applied yourself and actually try to get this stuff a part of your thought process. Please do it, and let's make the world a better place with better chess players. I don't know if that's really anything but an oxymoron, but hey, who knows? Let's really do what we're trying to do here and apply ourselves so that these ideas can become a part of our thought process ASAP. So, all right, guys, and hope you have a good day on chess.com, and we'll see you around.